The stopwatch clicked. 18 minutes, 47 seconds. Staff Sergeant Collins shook his head as he watched the woman stumble across the finish line of the 2-mile run, her breath coming in ragged gasps, sweat streaming down her face. Dead last. Again. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Thompson. His voice cut through the morning. Air like a blade. What was that supposed to be? A leisurely jog through the park? Rebecca Thompson bent over, hands on her knees, chest heaving. Her auburn hair had escaped its regulation bun, strands plastered to her forehead with perspiration. Around her, the other recruits tried not to stare, but their sideways glances spoke volumes. This was the third time this week she'd failed to meet the minimum time requirement. Sorry, Staff Sergeant, I'll do better tomorrow. Collins stepped closer, his combat boots crunching on the gravel track. Better? Thompson, you're not even close to better. The minimum time for your age group is 15 minutes, 36 seconds. You're running like you're carrying a backpack full of rocks. The other recruits had already begun their cool-down stretches, but they listened with the morbid fascination of those witnessing a public execution. Private Martinez whispered something to Private Johnson, who snorted with barely concealed laughter. Maybe she should try the administrative track, Johnson muttered, just loud enough for Rebecca to hear. Seems more like her speed. Rebecca straightened slowly, her breathing beginning to regulate. Her gray eyes, flecked with gold, met Collins. Stare without flinching. I'll make the time, Staff Sergeant. I just need to build up my endurance. Endurance? Collins' voice dripped with disbelief. Thompson, you've been here for 8 weeks. 8 weeks of the same excuses, the same failures, the same disappointing performance. At what point do you accept that maybe you're not cut out for this? The morning sun was beginning to burn off the early fog that clung to Fort Braxton's training grounds. In the distance, the sound of helicopters conducting their morning flights created a rhythmic backdrop to the scene unfolding on the track. Rebecca had heard that sound before, in different places, under different circumstances. But that was another life, another name, another woman who officially no longer existed. I'm not quitting, Staff Sergeant. Collins studied her face, looking for the telltale signs of someone about to break. He'd seen it countless times before: the trembling lip, the watery eyes, the slumped shoulders of defeat. But Rebecca Thompson stood straight, her jaw set with quiet determination that seemed almost out of place given her consistent failures. Thompson, let me paint you a picture of reality. You can't make the run time. Yesterday, you barely managed 3 pull-ups when the minimum is 8. Your push-ups look like you're trying to kiss the ground. Your marksmanship scores are mediocre at best. Explain to me why the United States Army should invest any more time in someone who can't meet basic physical standards. The circle of recruits had grown larger now, drawn by the spectacle of another Thompson dressing down. These public humiliations had become routine, expected entertainment during their training cycle. Rebecca had become the cautionary tale, the example of what happened when someone bit off more than they could chew. Private Davis, a former college football player who'd breezed through every physical challenge, shook his head sympathetically. She tries hard, but trying isn't enough out here. This isn't some feel-good movie where determination conquers all. Maybe she has some condition, suggested Private Williams, a pre-med student who'd enlisted to pay for medical school. Asthma, or a heart murmur, or something that makes cardio harder for her. But Rebecca's medical records showed nothing unusual. Clean bill of health, no restrictions, no excuses. Just a 28-year-old woman from small-town Ohio who'd walked into a recruitment office 6 months ago and insisted she wanted to serve her country. Her background check had revealed nothing more interesting than a series of odd jobs: waitressing, retail, some clerical work for a security firm that had since gone out of business. I don't need explanations or excuses, Collins continued, his voice carrying across the training ground. I need results. This isn't summer camp. This isn't a place where everyone gets a participation trophy. This is the United States Army. And we have standards for a reason. Rebecca nodded, accepting the criticism without argument. She'd learned early in her time at Fort Braxton that defending herself only made things worse. Better to take the heat, fade into the background, and try again tomorrow. The performance had to be maintained, even when every instinct screamed at her to show them what she was really capable of. Thompson, report to my office after chow. We need to discuss your future here. As Collins walked away, the other recruits began to disperse, their conversations buzzing with speculation about Rebecca's fate. The general consensus was that she'd be gone within the week, another casualty of basic training's unforgiving standards. Private Martinez fell into step beside her as they headed toward the mess hall. Hey, don't let it get to you. Collins is tough on everyone. Some more than others, Rebecca replied, her voice steady despite the morning's humiliation. True, but maybe there's a reason for that. Maybe he sees something in you that's worth pushing. Rebecca almost smiled at the irony. If Collins only knew what he was really looking at, he might understand why his usual intimidation tactics fell flat. She'd faced much worse than a disappointed drill sergeant. She'd faced enemies who used fear as a weapon, who'd perfected the art of breaking people down until nothing remained but compliance. The mess hall was filled with the usual morning chatter, complaints about the food, speculation about upcoming training exercises, gossip about who was struggling and who was excelling. Rebecca took her tray and found a spot at the end of a table, methodically eating her eggs and toast while listening to the conversations around her. Did you hear about the field exercise next week? Davis was saying. Supposedly, it's going to be the hardest one yet. Full combat simulation, 72 hours in the field with minimal supplies. I heard they're going to throw everything at us, Williams added. Obstacles, hostile role players, the works. It's supposed to separate the wheat from the chaff. Rebecca continued, eating, her expression neutral, but her mind was already analyzing the tactical implications. Field exercises were where her real training would be most likely to show through. She'd have to be especially careful to maintain her cover, to continue playing the role of the struggling recruit who just couldn't quite cut it. The weight of the performance was exhausting in ways that had nothing to do with physical fitness. Every day, she had to consciously hold herself back, to stumble where she could easily excel, to appear confused by concepts she'd mastered years ago. The muscle memory was the hardest part to suppress, the way her body automatically wanted to move with lethal efficiency, the way her mind instantly assessed threats and calculated responses. After breakfast, Rebecca made her way to Collins' office, passing through corridors lined with military history and motivational posters. The building smelled of floor wax and industrial cleaning products, a scent that triggered memories of other military facilities in other parts of the world. But those memories belonged to someone else, someone who'd been officially declared dead in a helicopter crash over the mountains of Afghanistan. Collins was waiting for her, seated behind a desk cluttered with training reports and personnel files. Rebecca's folder was open in front of him, its contents spread out like evidence at a trial. Sit down, Thompson. She took the chair across from him, maintaining the posture she'd cultivated over the past 8 weeks, attentive but not too rigid, respectful but not military sharp. Everything about her body language had to suggest someone trying hard, but lacking the natural instincts for military life. I've been reviewing your performance metrics, Collins began, tapping the papers in front of him. Physical training, marksmanship, leadership exercises, academic testing. Do you see a pattern here? Rebecca looked at the scores, all carefully calibrated to be just below acceptable standards. I'm not meeting expectations, Staff Sergeant. That's one way to put it. Another way would be to say you're consistently failing to demonstrate the basic competencies we expect from our soldiers. He leaned back in his chair, studying her face. Tell me, Thompson, why did you join the Army? The question she'd been preparing for since the day she'd walked into the recruitment office. The answer had to be believable, heartfelt, but not so compelling that it would invite deeper scrutiny into her background. I wanted to serve my country, Staff Sergeant. To be part of something bigger than myself. Noble sentiments. But wanting to serve and being able to serve are two different things. The Army isn't a charity organization. We can't carry people who can't carry themselves. Collins pulled out a form from the bottom of the stack. This is a recommendation for administrative separation. Medical discharge due to failure to meet physical standards. It's not dishonorable. You'd leave with your dignity intact and full. Benefits for the time you've served. Rebecca stared at the form, calculating her options. Leaving now would mean starting over somewhere else, rebuilding her cover, finding another way to stay hidden while remaining useful. But it would also mean abandoning the carefully constructed identity she'd spent months developing. I'd like to request another chance, Staff Sergeant. The field exercise next week. Let me prove myself there. Collins raised an eyebrow. Thompson, if you can't run 2 miles in under 16 minutes, what makes you think you can handle a 72-hour combat? Simulation? Maybe I perform better under pressure. Maybe I just need a real challenge instead of running in circles on a track. Something in her tone made Collins pause. For just a moment, he heard an undertone of confidence that seemed at odds with her. Track record. But then Thompson looked down at her hands, the momentary steel in her voice fading back into the uncertain hesitancy he'd come to associate with her. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. 1 chance, he said finally. But if you fail the field exercise, you're out. No appeals, no second chances, no sob stories. Clear. Crystal clear, Staff Sergeant. As Rebecca left his office, she allowed herself a small smile. The field exercise would be dangerous not because of the physical challenges, but because it would be nearly impossible to maintain her cover while ensuring the safety of her fellow recruits. Real combat situations had a way of stripping away pretense, of revealing who people really were under pressure, but she'd managed more difficult balancing acts before. The key was to help without appearing to help, to lead without seeming to lead, to save lives without anyone realizing they'd needed saving. In the distance, she could hear the sounds of the next training cycle beginning their morning run. Fresh recruits, full of enthusiasm and determination, convinced that their civilian lives had prepared them for what lay ahead. She remembered being that naive once, a lifetime ago, when she'd believed that serving her country meant wearing a uniform and following orders. Now she knew better. Real service happened in the shadows, performed by people whose names would never appear in history books, whose sacrifices would never be acknowledged. The most important battles were fought by those who couldn't afford to win publicly, who had to settle for the quiet satisfaction of knowing they'd made a difference. Rebecca Thompson, a struggling recruit, would continue to fail every test that mattered to Staff Sergeant Collins. But the woman she'd once been, the one who died in that helicopter crash, would be ready when her skills were truly needed. Because failure, she'd learned, was just another kind of camouflage. The alarm buzzed at 0430 hours, but Rebecca Thompson had been awake for 20 minutes already. Her internal clock, calibrated by years of operations across multiple time zones, rarely allowed her the luxury of oversleeping. She lay still in her narrow bunk, listening to the breathing patterns of her 7 bunkmates, cataloging who was naturally waking up and who was still deep in REM sleep. Private Chun, the bunk above her, had nightmares 3 times a week, always. The same pattern: restless tossing around 0200, then sudden stillness around 0300. Former gang member from Los Angeles. According to his file, running from a past that wouldn't let him sleep peacefully. Rebecca understood the feeling. Across the barracks, Private Rodriguez snored with mechanical precision. Factory worker from Detroit, joined up after the plant closed. Steady, reliable, the kind of person who'd follow orders without question, but might freeze when those orders stopped making sense. Good soldier material if he could learn to think independently. She rose silently, muscle memory guiding her movements to avoid the creaky floorboard beside her bunk and the loose locker door. That squeaked if opened too quickly. In the bathroom, she performed her morning routine with the same methodical precision she applied to everything else. Teeth brushed for exactly 2 minutes. Face washed with cold water. Hair pulled back into a regulation bun that looked slightly messy but was actually secured with techniques she'd learned from a Russian operative in Prague. The mirror reflected a face that had been carefully crafted to appear unremarkable. No dramatic scars, no telltale signs of extensive training, nothing that would draw unwanted attention. The real work had been done by a plastic surgeon in Switzerland who specialized in creating new identities for people who needed to disappear completely. Subtle changes, a slightly different nose shape, softened jawline, altered cheekbone structure. Not enough to make her beautiful, just enough to make her forgettable. By the time the official wake-up call echoed through the barracks, Rebecca was already dressed and making her bunk with corners tight enough to bounce a quarter. She watched as her bunkmates stumbled through their morning routines, noting who was naturally organized and who was still struggling with basic military discipline. Private Williams emerged from the bathroom looking like he'd been hit by a truck. Pre-med student, brilliant academically but physically soft from years spent in libraries instead of gyms. He'd been struggling almost as much as Rebecca, though his failures were genuine where hers were calculated. "Morning, Thompson," he mumbled, fumbling with his uniform buttons. "Ready for another day of excellence?" "As ready as I'll ever be," she replied, helping him straighten his shirt collar. The gesture appeared motherly, protective, but it also gave her a chance to check his pulse and respiration. Elevated stress levels, probably worried about the upcoming field exercise. She'd have to keep an eye on him. The mess hall was a symphony of controlled chaos. 200 recruits from different training companies flowing through the chow line with the efficiency of a well-oiled machine. Rebecca took her usual portion, enough to maintain her cover as someone struggling with physical demands, not so little as to raise concerns about eating disorders. She found her customary spot at the end of table 7, positioning herself where she could observe the entire room while appearing to focus on her breakfast. Old habits from a time when situational awareness meant the difference between coming home and coming home in a box. "Thompson, you look like you're planning to murder someone," Private Martinez said, sliding into the seat across from her. "It's just scrambled eggs." Rebecca forced a smile, the expression carefully practiced to seem natural. "Just trying to wake up. Not much of a morning person." Martinez was from El Paso, bilingual, sharp instincts for reading people. Former Border Patrol agent who'd joined the Army for better advancement opportunities. He'd been watching her for weeks now, not with suspicion, but with the professional interest of someone who recognized that things weren't always what they seemed. "You know," Martinez said, lowering his voice, "I've been thinking about what Collins said yesterday, about you not being cut out for this." "He's probably right," Rebecca replied, maintaining her cover. "Some people just aren't meant to be soldiers." "See, that's what I don't get." Martinez leaned closer, his dark eyes studying her face. "Yesterday during the obstacle course, when Williams got stuck on the rope climb, you talked him through it like you'd done it 1,000 times. Your breathing techniques, the way you spotted potential problems before they happened, that's not beginner stuff." Rebecca's pulse didn't change, but she felt the familiar tightness in her chest that came with potential exposure. "I read a lot of fitness magazines, YouTube videos. You pick things up, maybe." Martinez didn't sound convinced. But I've seen a lot of people struggle with military training, and you struggle differently. Like you're holding something back instead of reaching for something you don't have." Before Rebecca could respond, the conversation was interrupted by a commotion at the next table. Private Davis had knocked over his orange juice, the liquid spreading across the table toward a stack of training manuals belonging to Staff Sergeant Collins. Without thinking, Rebecca moved. Her hand shot out, catching the glass before it could hit the floor while simultaneously using her napkin to create a barrier that stopped the juice from reaching the manuals. The entire sequence took less than 2 seconds and required reflexes that no struggling recruit should possess. The table went quiet. Davis stared at her in surprise, and Martinez's eyebrows rose slightly. Even Williams, still half asleep, seemed to register that something unusual had just happened. "Nice reflexes," Davis said slowly. "You sure you're the same person who can't climb a rope?" Rebecca forced a laugh, playing it off as luck. "Just happened to be looking in the right direction. Good thing Collins would have killed you if you'd ruined his paperwork." But she could see the wheels turning in Martinez's head, adding this incident to his growing collection of anomalies. She'd have to be more careful, let more small disasters happen around her, prove that her moment of competence was just a fluke. After breakfast, the training company formed up for morning PT. Rebecca took her usual position in the back rank, surrounded by the other marginal performers who preferred to blend in rather than stand out. The irony wasn't lost on her in her previous life. She'd been the kind of person who naturally gravitated toward leadership positions, who couldn't help but excel even when trying to stay under the radar. "Today we're going to work on combat movement," announced Sergeant Lopez, Collins' second in command. "Low crawls, high crawls, movement under fire. The field exercise next week will require you to move tactically across hostile terrain while maintaining operational security." Rebecca's mouth went dry. Tactical movement was like breathing to her, automatic, instinctive, perfect. She'd crawled through minefields in Bosnia, scaled cliffs in Afghanistan, moved through urban warfare zones in Iraq with a silence that had earned her the nickname Ghost among her former unit. Pretending to be bad at it would be like trying to forget how to walk. The training began with basic low crawl technique. Rebecca positioned herself behind Williams, using his genuine struggles as cover for her own calculated incompetence. She moved too slowly, made unnecessary noise, allowed her equipment to catch on obstacles that she could have avoided with her eyes closed. "Thompson," Lopez's voice cracked across the training field. "What are you doing back there? This isn't a Sunday picnic. Move with purpose." "Sorry, Sergeant," Rebecca called back, deliberately catching her rifle sling on a piece of wire. The fumbling was painful to watch, and she could feel the frustration radiating from Lopez as he watched what appeared to be complete tactical incompetence. But as she crawled, Rebecca was conducting her own assessment of the training area. Sight lines, potential cover positions, natural choke points where an enemy might set up an ambush. Her mind automatically cataloged escape routes, defensive positions, fields of fire, information that might prove crucial during the upcoming field exercise. Private Chen, crawling beside her, was struggling with the physical demands of the low crawl. His breathing was labored, his movements increasingly erratic as fatigue set in. Rebecca could see the signs of impending heat exhaustion: flushed face, excessive sweating, slightly unfocused eyes. "Stay hydrated," she whispered, passing him her water bottle during a brief rest. "Small sips, don't gulp it down." "Thanks," Chun gasped. "How do you know about that stuff?" "My dad was a paramedic," Rebecca lied smoothly. "He always said dehydration was the enemy's best friend." The lie came easily, part of the elaborate backstory she'd constructed for Rebecca Thompson. Father was a paramedic, mother was a teacher, raised in small-town Ohio where everyone knew everyone else's business. Simple, boring, completely fabricated. and backed up by enough manufactured evidence to fool even a thorough background investigation. As the morning progressed, Rebecca continued her performance of mediocrity. She missed obvious hand signals, took too long to set up firing positions, and generally appeared to be exactly what Collins believed her to be: someone who joined the army with good intentions but lacked the basic aptitude for military service. But she was also learning. Every exercise revealed something about her fellow recruits: their strengths, weaknesses, breaking points, and hidden reserves of courage. Information that might save lives when the training became real, when the bullets were live and the enemy wasn't playing by exercise rules. Williams was smarter than he appeared, capable of brilliant tactical insights when he wasn't second-guessing himself. Davis had natural leadership abilities, but tended to make decisions too quickly, without considering all the variables. Rodriguez was steady under pressure, but lacked initiative when situations deviated from standard procedures, and Martinez continued to watch her, his suspicions growing with each small inconsistency in her performance. During the afternoon weapons training, Rebecca faced another challenge. Marksmanship was one of her few acknowledged strengths, though she was careful to keep her scores mediocre rather than exceptional. The M4 rifle felt familiar in her hands, almost like greeting an old friend after a long absence. "Thompson, you're up," called the range instructor. "Let's see if you can hit the broad side of a barn." Rebecca approached the firing line, affecting the slightly nervous demeanor she'd perfected over weeks of training. She adjusted her stance awkwardly, took longer than necessary to acquire her sight picture, and fired her first shot deliberately wide of the target center. "Better," the instructor noted, checking her score. "Still not great, but at least you're on the paper this time." The subsequent shots were carefully placed to create a pattern of marginal competence. Good enough to pass basic requirements, not good enough to draw attention. She missed one shot entirely, clustering the others around the outer rings of the target. To observers, that looked like someone who'd received basic training, but lacked natural talent. In reality, every shot was exactly where she'd intended it to go. The muscle memory was so ingrained that missing the center of the target required more skill than hitting it. Like a professional pianist deliberately playing off-key, the performance demanded a level of control that few people could understand. "Not bad, Thompson," Martinez said as they cleaned their weapons afterward. "You're improving." "Thanks. Still got a long way to go, though. Maybe." Martinez worked a cleaning rod through his rifle barrel, his movements precise and practiced. "But I've been thinking about what you said during the obstacle course, about breathing techniques and body positioning. That's pretty advanced stuff for someone who learned it from YouTube." Rebecca's hands stilled for just a moment before resuming their cleaning routine. "Like I said, I read a lot. Watch training videos when I can't sleep." "What kind of training?" "Videos?" The question was casual, but Rebecca heard the undertone. Martinez was fishing, testing her story for inconsistencies. She'd have to give him something believable, something that would satisfy his curiosity without revealing too much. Military fitness stuff mostly. There's this whole community of former soldiers who make training content for people trying to get in shape. Figured it might help me understand what I was getting into. Makes sense. Martinez seemed satisfied for now, but Rebecca could tell he wasn't done asking questions. She'd have to find ways to redirect his attention, maybe even create some false vulnerabilities that would make her seem more human, more relatable. As evening approached, Rebecca found herself in the common area, ostensibly studying training manuals but actually observing the social dynamics of her unit. Davis was holding court near the television, regaling a group of recruits with stories from his college football days. Williams sat alone in a corner, reading a medical textbook that had nothing to do with military training. Chun was writing what appeared to be a letter home, his handwriting careful and deliberate, and Martinez was watching her, still trying to solve the puzzle she represented. The irony was that everything about her, Current situation went against her training. Special operations had taught her to excel, to lead, to be the best in every situation. Failing on purpose felt like betraying everything she'd worked for, every sacrifice she'd made. But the mission required her to remain hidden, to be forgettable, to fade into the background until her skills were truly needed. The field exercise would test that resolve like nothing else. In a real tactical situation, surrounded by live fire and genuine danger, would she be able to maintain her cover? Or would her instincts take over, revealing the truth she'd worked so hard to conceal? As lights out approached, Rebecca lay in her bunk, listening to the familiar sounds of a military barracks settling down for the night. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to fail convincingly while gathering the intelligence she needed to keep her fellow recruits alive. In the darkness, she allowed herself a moment to remember who she'd been before Rebecca Thompson, a different woman with a different name, who'd served with honor until the day she'd been declared dead in a helicopter crash that never happened. That woman had sacrificed everything for her country, including her very identity. Now it was Rebecca Thompson's turn to serve, even if no one could ever know the true extent of her sacrifice. The briefing room felt smaller than usual as Colonel Harrison stepped to the podium, his weathered face bearing the kind of serious expression that made seasoned soldiers pay attention. Behind him, a large map of the training area dominated the wall, marked with red zones, blue routes, and yellow objective points that would define the next 72 hours of their lives. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Exercise Iron Gauntlet," Harrison began, his voice carrying the authority of 3 decades in uniform. "This is not a drill. This is not a game. For the next 3 days, you will face scenarios designed to test everything you've learned during your time here at Fort Braxton." Rebecca sat in the back row, maintaining her usual low profile, while her mind automatically began processing the tactical information being presented. Terrain analysis, weather patterns, potential threat vectors, all cataloged and filed away, with the precision of someone who'd planned real operations in far more dangerous environments. "Your mission," Harrison continued, clicking to the next slide, "is to conduct a reconnaissance patrol through the Blackwater Valley training area. Establish observation posts at designated checkpoints and extract vital intelligence about enemy movements. You'll be facing opposition forces composed of instructors from the Ranger Training Brigade, Special Forces personnel on loan from Fort Campbell, and civilian contractors with extensive military experience." A ripple of nervous energy passed through the assembled recruits. These weren't the usual training cadre who pulled their punches and offered helpful hints when students made mistakes. This was the real-deal professional soldiers, whose job was to make the exercise as challenging and realistic as possible. Staff Sergeant Collins stood at the side of the room, his arms crossed, studying the faces of his trainees. His eyes lingered on Rebecca for a moment longer than the others, and she could read the skepticism in his expression. He was waiting for her to fail spectacularly, to prove his assessment that she didn't belong in the Army. "The opposition force will use live ammunition during certain phases of the exercise," Harrison announced, causing several recruits to shift uncomfortably in their seats. "Simunition rounds only, but they pack enough punch to leave a mark. You'll be wearing protective gear, but trust me, you don't want to get hit." Williams raised his hand tentatively. "Sir, what happens if someone gets seriously injured?" "Medical personnel will be standing by at all times," Harrison replied. "But understand, this once you're wounded, according to exercise parameters, you're out of action until evacuation. No second chances, no do-overs. Your team will have to adapt and overcome." Rebecca felt a familiar tightness in her chest. Real bullets, even simulation rounds, had a way of stripping away pretense. Under fire, people reverted to their true nature. Leaders emerged, followers revealed themselves, and the weak either found hidden strength or crumbled completely. Maintaining her cover while bullets were flying, even fake ones, would be the ultimate test of her acting abilities. "You'll be divided into 4-person fire teams," Collins announced, stepping forward with a clipboard. "Team leaders have been selected based on demonstrated leadership potential during previous exercises." Rebecca held her breath, hoping she wouldn't be placed in a leadership position. The last thing she needed was the responsibility of making tactical decisions that others would follow, decisions that might accidentally reveal her true capabilities. Team Alpha: Davis, Thompson, Williams, Chun. Collins read from his list. Rebecca's heart sank. Davis was a natural leader, aggressive and confident, but also impulsive. Williams was brilliant but physically weak. Chun was steady but inexperienced. And she was supposed to be the team's weakest link, the one they'd have to carry through the exercise. Team Bravo: Martinez, Rodriguez, Patterson, Kumar. Collins continued. Rebecca caught Martinez's eye across the room. He was studying her again, that same analytical look she'd been seeing more frequently. Being separated from him might actually be a blessing. One less person watching for inconsistencies in her performance. The briefing continued with detailed explanations of rules of engagement, communication protocols, and mission objectives. Rebecca absorbed every detail while maintaining the glazed expression of someone struggling to keep up with complex military terminology. "Equipment issue begins at 1400 hours, Harrison concluded. "Mission launch is at 0600 tomorrow. Questions?" "Private." Kumar raised his hand. "Sir, what happens if we fail the mission?" Harrison's smile was not particularly reassuring. "Let's just say that failure is not an option you want to explore. This exercise will determine who continues with advanced training and who gets reassigned to other duties." As the briefing concluded and recruits began filing out, Rebecca found herself walking alongside her new teammates. Davis immediately took charge, his football player mentality asserting itself in the military environment. "All right, team, here's how we're going to handle this," Davis announced, his voice carrying the confidence of someone who'd never faced a challenge he couldn't overcome through sheer determination. "Williams, you're our brains. Thompson, you'll handle communications. Chun, you're with me on point. We're going to show these instructors what Team Alpha is made of." Williams looked nervous, but nodded agreement. Chun seemed content to follow Davis's lead. Rebecca simply shrugged, playing the role of someone grateful to be included, but not particularly optimistic about their chances. "What's our tactical approach?" Williams asked, surprising everyone with the question. "I mean, do we have a strategy beyond just charging forward?" Davis paused, clearly not having thought that far ahead. "We'll adapt to the situation. Stay flexible, react to whatever they throw at us." Rebecca bit her tongue. In her previous life, that kind of non-planning would have gotten people killed. Real operations required detailed preparation, contingency planning, and thorough intelligence analysis. But she couldn't voice those concerns without revealing knowledge she wasn't supposed to possess. "Maybe we should study the terrain maps," she suggested carefully. "Figure out the best routes, identify potential trouble spots." "Good thinking, Thompson," Davis said, though his tone suggested he was surprised she'd contributed anything useful. "Williams, you're good with maps, right? You and Thompson can handle the route planning." As they made their way to the equipment issue point, Rebecca found herself walking beside Williams, who was already pulling out a notebook and pencil. "I'm not really good with tactical stuff," Williams admitted quietly. "I can read the maps, but I don't know what to look for in terms of military strategy." "Just focus on the basics," Rebecca replied, fighting the urge to launch into a detailed explanation of terrain analysis. "High ground, water sources, choke points where we might get bottled up. How do you know about choke points?" Rebecca cursed herself silently. Another slip, another moment where her real knowledge showed through the carefully constructed facade. "Video games mostly. Call of Duty, that kind of thing. You learn to think about maps differently. Williams accepted the explanation, but Rebecca could see him filing it away along with all the other small inconsistencies in her behavior. She was accumulating too many of these moments, creating a pattern that observant people might start to notice. The equipment issue process was chaos, organized by people who'd done it 1,000 times before. Recruits lined up at different stations, receiving everything from night vision goggles to field rations, body armor to communication devices. Rebecca moved through the line with practiced efficiency, checking each piece of equipment for functionality while appearing to fumble with unfamiliar gear. The body armor was standard issue, heavier than the custom gear she'd worn in her previous life but adequate for training purposes. The communication radio was an older model, reliable but limited in range and encryption capabilities. The night vision equipment was decent quality, though she'd used much better systems during actual operations. "Thompson, you sure you know how to work that radio?" Davis asked, watching her examine the communication device. "I'll figure it out," she replied, deliberately handling the radio with less confidence than she felt. "Can't be that complicated, right?" Chun laughed. Famous last words. Half the failures in these exercises come from communication breakdowns. Rebecca knew he was right, but for different reasons than he imagined. Communication failures in real operations usually stemmed from equipment malfunctions, enemy jamming, or operators who hadn't been properly trained. In training exercises, they often resulted from instructors deliberately creating problems to test how teams adapted to adversity. As evening approached, the 4 teams gathered in their designated barracks areas to conduct final preparations. Team Alpha spread their equipment across Williams's bunk, creating an inventory of everything they'd been issued. Body armor, check. Weapons, check. Ammunition, check. Davis counted off items, like he was preparing for a weekend camping trip rather than a military exercise that could end there. Army careers. Williams had spread the terrain maps across his desk, using colored pencils to mark potential routes and hazards. His academic background showed in the meticulous way he approached the problem, but Rebecca could see several tactical errors in his analysis. "What do you think about this route?" Williams asked, pointing to a path that followed a valley floor between 2 ridgelines. Rebecca studied the map, her trained eye immediately identifying the problems. The route was obvious, predictable, and offered no escape options if they encountered opposition. It was exactly the kind of path that enemy forces would monitor and potentially ambush, but she couldn't say that directly without revealing military knowledge she wasn't supposed to have. "Looks pretty straightforward," she said instead. "Maybe a little too straightforward? I mean, if I was trying to stop someone, that's probably where I'd wait for them." Williams looked at the map again, his academic mind beginning to see the tactical implications. "You're right. It's the most direct route, which makes it the most obvious. But the alternatives involve a lot more climbing. Better tired than dead," Chun said grimly. "Even in training, getting ambushed probably doesn't feel very good." Davis studied the alternative routes, his competitive nature warring with his preference for direct action. "The instructors are expecting us to think like that, though. Maybe the obvious route is actually the safest because they'll expect us to avoid it." Rebecca resisted the urge to explain the concept of double-blind tactical thinking. In real operations, commanders often chose obvious routes precisely because the enemy expected them to be clever. But they also prepared multiple contingencies and maintained constant situational awareness to adapt when assumptions proved wrong. "Could go either way," she said diplomatically. "Maybe we should prepare for both options and decide based on what we see when we get out there." It was the kind of non-committal response that fit her established pattern of offering suggestions without taking leadership responsibility. But Williams nodded approvingly, recognizing the wisdom of maintaining tactical flexibility. As the team continued their planning session, Rebecca became aware of activity in the corridor outside their barracks. Instructors were moving through the building, conducting what appeared to be routine inspections, but were probably intelligence-gathering operations, designed to assess each team's preparation level. "Someone's coming," she said quietly, automatically. Falling back on skills honed during years of covert operations, the others looked up in surprise as Staff Sergeant Collins appeared in their doorway, his eyes scanning the organized equipment and map-covered desk. "How's the planning going, team?" "Alpha?" Collins asked, his tone deceptively casual. "Good, Staff Sergeant," Davis replied. "We're analyzing the terrain, developing our approach." Collins stepped into the room, his gaze lingering on Williams's map work before turning to Rebecca. "Thompson, what's your assessment of the mission?" The question was a trap, Rebecca realized. Collins was testing whether she'd suddenly display tactical knowledge that contradicted her established pattern of mediocrity. He was looking for any sign that she was more capable than she appeared. "Honestly, Staff Sergeant, it sounds pretty intimidating," she replied, allowing a note of uncertainty to creep into her voice. "I'm just hoping I don't let the team down." "And what role will you be playing during the exercise?" "Communications, Staff Sergeant." Davis figured I could handle the radio without screwing up too badly. Collins's expression suggested he had doubts about even that limited responsibility. "Radio communication can be the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure, Thompson. Are you sure you're up for that kind of responsibility?" Rebecca felt the familiar surge of irritation that came with being underestimated, but she forced it down. "I'll do my best, Staff Sergeant. The team will help me if I run into problems." "See that they do." Collins turned to address the entire team. "Gentlemen and lady, tomorrow you'll face challenges that will test everything you think you know about being soldiers. The opposition force won't hesitate to exploit any weakness, any moment of hesitation, any failure of leadership or communication." His eyes found Rebecca again. "Some of you may discover that you're not cut out for military service. That's not a failure, it's an opportunity to find a different way to serve your country. Better to learn that lesson in training than in combat." After Collins left, the team continued their preparations with renewed seriousness. The staff sergeant's visit had driven home the reality that their Army careers might depend on the next 72 hours. "No pressure, right?" William said nervously. "We'll be fine," Davis insisted, though his confidence seemed forced. "We just need to stick together and watch each other's backs." Rebecca nodded agreement while privately calculating all the ways their mission could go wrong. Poor planning, inadequate preparation, overconfidence, and inexperience were a dangerous combination. In real combat, such factors led to casualty reports and folded flags. But this was training, she reminded herself. The instructors wanted them to learn, even if the lessons came through controlled failure. Her job was to help her teammates survive the exercise while maintaining her cover as someone barely competent enough to carry a radio dot as lights out approached. Rebecca lay in her bunk listening to the nervous energy radiating from her teammates and the other recruits throughout the barracks. Tomorrow would bring the ultimate test of her ability to balance her true capabilities with her fabricated identity. The mission would begin at dawn, and with it, the most dangerous 72 hours of her carefully constructed new life. Dawn broke cold and gray over the Blackwater Valley training area, the morning mist clinging to the hills like smoke from distant battles. Rebecca stood with Team Alpha at the insertion point, watching Davis pace nervously while Williams checked and rechecked their equipment for the third time. The weight of her gear felt familiar despite months of pretending otherwise, the comforting pressure of body armor, the balanced load of ammunition and water, the secure fit of her helmet. Radio check, the exercise controller's voice crackled through their communication devices. "All teams report status." Davis keyed his radio, his voice tight with pre-mission nerves. "Team Alpha, ready for insertion." Around them, The other 3 teams conducted their own final preparations. Team Bravo, led by Martinez, appeared calm and focused. Rebecca caught Martinez's eye across the staging area and saw him studying her again. That same analytical expression she'd been seeing for weeks. "All right, Alpha Team," the controller announced. "Your mission clock starts ... now. Move out." Davis shouldered his pack and started toward the tree line, his movements betraying his football background, powerful but lacking the fluid economy of motion that came with military training. Williams struggled with his load, the academic clearly not accustomed to carrying 60 pounds of gear across rough terrain. Chun fell into a steady rhythm behind Davis, his factory work having given him the endurance for sustained physical effort. Rebecca took up the rear position, ostensibly because she was the team's weakest member, but actually because it allowed her to monitor their tactical situation while maintaining her cover. From this position, she could watch for threats approaching from behind while keeping an eye on her teammates' performance. The first hour passed without incident as they moved through relatively easy terrain, following a game trail that wound between stands of pine and oak. Davis set a pace that was too fast for sustained movement, burning energy they'd need later. But Rebecca couldn't correct him without revealing tactical knowledge she wasn't supposed to possess. Williams was already showing signs of fatigue, his breathing becoming labored as he struggled to keep up. Rebecca moved closer to him, offering quiet encouragement while secretly monitoring his condition for signs of heat exhaustion or equipment failure. "How you holding up?" she asked, keeping her voice low to avoid drawing attention from Davis. "Been better," Williams gasped. "This pack weighs a ton. How do real soldiers do this for months at a time?" "You get used to it," Rebecca replied, then caught herself. That answer suggested more experience than Rebecca Thompson should have. "I mean, that's what I've heard. Supposedly your body adapts to the load over time." Williams nodded, accepting the explanation, but Rebecca mentally noted another slip in her carefully maintained cover. The pressure of the exercise was making it harder to suppress her natural instincts and knowledge. By mid-morning, they'd covered nearly 3 miles and were approaching their first checkpoint, a hilltop observation post where they were supposed to report enemy activity in the valley below. Davis called a halt at the base of the hill, gathering the team around a fallen log to discuss their approach. "According to the map, the up is about 200 meters up that slope," Davis said, pointing toward the crest. "Steep climb, but pretty straightforward." Rebecca studied the terrain, her trained eye immediately identifying several problems with Davis's assessment. The proposed route would silhouette them against the skyline, making them visible to anyone watching from the valley. The direct approach offered no cover if they encountered opposition, and the steep grade would leave them exhausted and vulnerable. But before she could figure out how to voice these concerns without seeming too knowledgeable, the decision was taken out of her hands. The first simulation round cracked past Davis's head, close enough that he instinctively ducked. More shots followed immediately, the distinctive pop hiss of simunition rounds filling the air as orange and red paintball-like projectiles began impacting around their position. "Contact front," Davis yelled, demonstrating that he'd at least absorbed some basic training. But then he immediately made a tactical error that would have gotten them all killed in real combat. "Charge the position," he ordered, rising from cover and starting up the hill toward the source of the gunfire. Williams looked terrified, but started to follow. Chun hesitated, his instincts telling him something was wrong, but lacking the knowledge to articulate what. And Rebecca faced the most difficult decision of her carefully constructed new life. Every fiber of her being screamed at her to take control of the situation. She could see the ambush positions, identify the fields of fire, and calculate the tactical response that would neutralize the threat with minimal risk to her team. But doing so would blow her cover completely, revealing capabilities that no struggling recruit should possess. "Davis, wait!" She called out, hoping to stop him before he led them into a kill zone. But Davis was already 20 meters up the slope, firing wildly at muzzle flashes he couldn't accurately locate. A simulation round caught him in the center of his chest armor. The impact hard enough to knock him backward. The exercise controller's voice immediately crackled over the radio. Team Alpha Leader, you are wounded and out of action. Seek immediate medical evacuation. Williams stared in shock as Davis rolled down the slope, clutching his chest where the round had impacted. The pre-med student's academic knowledge kicked in, and he rushed to check on their fallen team leader, leaving Chun and Rebecca to deal with the continuing gunfire. What do we do now? Chun shouted over the sound of incoming rounds. Rebecca's mind raced through options. With Davis out of action, someone had to take command. Williams was too shaken and inexperienced. Chun was steady but lacked leadership experience. That left her, the team member everyone expected to be the weakest link. Another burst of simulation fire forced them deeper into cover behind the fallen log. Rebecca could see the opposition positions, now 2 instructors with automatic weapons, positioned in a classic L-shaped ambush, designed to catch anyone trying to assault up the hill. Classic textbook setup, but deadly effective if approached incorrectly. Chun, can you see where they're shooting from? Rebecca asked, her voice steady despite the chaos. There's someone behind those rocks up there, Chun replied, pointing toward the obvious position. And I think there's another one off to the left. Rebecca nodded, confirming her own assessment. The instructors weren't trying to hide their positions. This was a teaching exercise designed to test the recruits' ability to respond to contact. But the lessons they were supposed to learn could be harsh if they made the wrong choices. Williams. How's Davis? He's okay, Williams called back. Bruised but not seriously hurt. The exercise controller says he's officially wounded and can't participate until evacuation, which meant Team Alpha was down to 3 functional members facing an unknown number of opposition forces in prepared positions with superior fields of fire. In her previous life, Rebecca would have called for artillery support, airstrikes, or at minimum a flanking maneuver with suppressing fire. But she was supposed to be a struggling recruit, armed with basic infantry weapons and no real tactical knowledge. The situation deteriorated further when Chun attempted to move to a better firing position. A simulation round caught him in the shoulder, spinning him around and sending him tumbling back into cover. Chun's hit, Williams yelled, his voice cracking with stress. Rebecca crawled over to check on Chun, who was clutching his shoulder and grimacing with pain. The simulation round had struck him in an unprotected area between his body armor panels, and while it wasn't a real bullet, the impact was significant enough to cause genuine injury. I think my collarbone might be cracked, Chun said through gritted teeth. That really hurt. The exercise controller's voice crackled over the radio again. Team Alpha, you have a second casualty. Provide medical treatment and prepare for evacuation. Rebecca found herself in an impossible situation. With Davis and Chun effectively out of action, she and Williams were facing a tactical problem that would challenge experienced soldiers. Williams was brilliant but had no practical combat training. She had extensive combat experience but couldn't use it without destroying her carefully maintained cover. What do we do? Williams asked, his academic confidence shattered by the reality of simulated combat. The mission says we're supposed to reach that observation post, but they've got us pinned down. Rebecca looked up the slope toward their objective, calculating angles and distances with automatic precision. She could see a route that would get them there, a covered approach using a small ravine that the instructors had probably overlooked, but suggesting it would require explaining tactical concepts that Rebecca Thompson shouldn't understand. Maybe we should call for help, Williams suggested. Radio the other teams, see if they can assist. Before Rebecca could respond, Martinez's voice came over the radio net. All teams, be advised, Team Bravo is engaging multiple targets at checkpoint 2. Heavy resistance. Team Charlie, what's your status? Team Charlie has taken casualties at checkpoint 3, came the reply. Request immediate support. The radio chatter painted a picture of coordinated opposition activity across the entire exercise area. The instructors weren't just testing individual teams, they were conducting a complex training scenario designed to overwhelm the recruits with multiple simultaneous challenges. We're on our own, Rebecca said quietly. The other teams have their own problems. Williams looked at their wounded teammates, then up toward the hilltop where muzzle flashes continued to wink from the opposition positions. I don't know what to do, he admitted. This isn't like anything they taught us in basic training. Rebecca felt the weight of command settling on her shoulders, the familiar pressure of making life and death decisions under fire. Except these weren't life and death decisions. They were pass or fail moments that would determine whether her teammates continued their military careers or found themselves assigned to supply clerks and motor pool mechanics. But the distinction felt meaningless as she watched Williams struggle with leadership responsibilities he'd never asked for, as she saw Chun fighting through pain to remain functional, as she heard Davis calling out tactical advice that was completely wrong for their situation. Williams, she said carefully, what if we tried a different approach? Instead of going straight up the hill, what if we found another route? What kind of route? Rebecca pointed toward the ravine she'd identified earlier. That washes over. There. It covers most of the way up, and it looks like it comes out near the observation post. Williams studied the terrain, his academic mind beginning to work through the tactical problem. That could work, he said slowly. But how do we know they don't have someone watching that approach too? We don't, Rebecca admitted. But staying here definitely won't get us to the objective. As if to emphasize her point, another burst of simulation fire impacted near their position, forcing them to press themselves deeper into cover. The instructors were maintaining pressure, preventing them from becoming comfortable in their defensive position. Okay, Williams decided. Let's try your route, but what about Davis and Chun? Rebecca looked at their wounded teammates. Davis was arguing with the exercise controller about his evacuation timeline, insisting he could still function despite his wound. Chun was trying to manipulate his rifle one-handed, determined not to be completely useless to the team. Chun, can you provide covering fire while Williams and I move? Rebecca asked. Chun nodded grimly. I can still shoot. Might not be very accurate, but I can make noise. That's all we need. Just keep their heads down while we move to that ravine. It was the kind of basic fire and movement tactic taught to every infantry soldier, but implementing it required coordination and timing that came from experience. Rebecca found herself taking charge despite every instinct telling her to remain in the background. On my signal, she said, then immediately caught herself. She wasn't supposed to be giving tactical commands. I mean, whenever you're ready. But Williams was looking at her with a strange expression, as if seeing her clearly for the first time. You know, he said quietly, for someone who can't run a decent 2-mile time, you seem pretty calm under fire. Rebecca's pulse quickened. Another observer was beginning to notice inconsistencies in her performance. Soon, the questions would become harder to deflect, and her carefully constructed identity would begin to unravel. Adrenaline, I guess, she replied. Amazing what you can do when people are shooting at you. Even if the bullets were only paint and compressed air, the simulation round struck the tree branch, 6 inches above Williams's head, sending splinters of bark cascading down as he pressed himself against the rocky wall of the ravine. Rebecca moved behind him with fluid precision, her boots finding purchase on stones that would have challenged a mountain goat, her breathing controlled despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. How much further? Williams whispered, his academic confidence long since shattered by the reality of being hunted through rough terrain by professional soldiers with automatic weapons. Rebecca paused at a bend in the ravine, using the technique she'd learned in the mountains of Afghanistan to observe around corners without exposing herself to enemy fire. The reflection in her knife blade showed her the path ahead, clear for another 50 meters before the ravine opened onto the hilltop where their objective waited. "Almost there," she replied quietly. "But we're going to have to cross open ground for the last bit." Behind them, Chun's covering fire had stopped. Either he'd been killed by the exercise controllers, or he'd run out of ammunition. Either way, they were now completely on their own. 2 recruits against an unknown number of instructors who'd been playing these war games for years. Williams checked his ammunition count for the 3rd time in 5 minutes. "I've got maybe 20 rounds left. How many do you have?" "Enough," Rebecca answered, though she'd been counting automatically and knew she had exactly 37 rounds remaining. The precision of her count was another dangerous slip. Struggling recruits didn't maintain such exact ammunition awareness. They reached the end of the ravine's cover, and Rebecca found herself staring across 30 meters of open ground toward the observation post that had been their objective since dawn. The position was a small concrete bunker built into the hillside, designed to look like a World War II-era fortification, but equipped with modern communication equipment. "I don't see any movement," Williams observed, peering around the edge of their cover. Rebecca's trained eye caught details that Williams missed, the way the grass was flattened in specific patterns, indicating recent foot traffic. The subtle gleam of metal from a position that offered overwatch of their approach route. The fact that the obvious defensive positions were empty, suggesting the opposition had set up somewhere unexpected. "They're there," she said quietly. "Just not where you'd expect them to be. How can you tell?" Rebecca caught herself before explaining about tactical indicators and fieldcraft. "Just a feeling. This whole thing has been too easy since we left the ravine." Williams studied the terrain with his analytical mind, trying to apply academic problem-solving to military tactics. "So what do we do? We can't stay here forever, and we need to reach that bunker to complete the mission." Before Rebecca could answer, the decision was made for them. The distinctive crack of simulation rounds filled the air, but this time they weren't aimed at Williams and Rebecca. Instead, the fire was directed back down the hill toward the position where they'd left. "Davis and Chun. Team Alpha, this is Bravo 6. Martinez's voice crackled over their radio. "We're observing your position and taking fire from multiple hostiles. Request immediate assistance." Rebecca's blood went cold. Martinez had found Davis and Chun, probably while conducting his own movement to his team's objective. Now Team Bravo was engaged in a firefight that could result in serious casualties if someone didn't intervene quickly. "We have to help them," Williams said, already starting to move back down the ravine. "Wait," Rebecca called out, her tactical mind automatically calculating the situation. If they abandoned their objective to assist Team Bravo, they'd fail their own mission. But if they continued toward the bunker while other recruits were in danger, people could get hurt. The radio chatter intensified as Martinez's team reported taking casualties. His voice carried a note of genuine concern that suggested this wasn't just exercise roleplay, someone was actually injured. "Team Bravo has 2 wounded and 1 Kia," Martinez reported. "Hostile forces have us pinned down with automatic weapons. Cannot reach casualties for evacuation." Rebecca closed her eyes, fighting against instincts honed by years of real combat. In Afghanistan, she'd been the person other units called when situations went bad, when conventional tactics weren't working, when someone needed to do the impossible. Now she was supposed to be a failing recruit who couldn't even run 2 miles without collapsing. "Thompson, we have to go back," Williams insisted. "People are hurt." "I know," Rebecca replied, her internal struggle playing out in real time. But if we leave now, we fail the mission. Everything we've worked for. Forget the mission. Williams interrupted. This is about helping our fellow soldiers. A burst of automatic fire echoed across the valley, followed by someone screaming, a sound that carried genuine pain rather than exercise dramatics. Rebecca's military training took over before her conscious mind could stop it. "Follow me," she said, her voice carrying a tone of command that Williams had never heard before. "Stay low, watch your spacing, and do exactly what I tell you." Williams started to ask how she knew what to do, but Rebecca was already moving, flowing down the hillside with a grace and speed that seemed impossible for someone who'd been struggling with basic physical training for months. She used terrain features for concealment, chose routes that minimized their exposure to enemy observation, and moved with the kind of tactical awareness that took years to develop. Williams struggled to keep up, his academic background providing no preparation for this kind of high-speed movement under pressure. "How are you doing this?" Williams gasped as they paused behind a cluster of boulders. Rebecca froze, realizing that her cover was completely blown. She'd been moving like the special operations soldier she'd once been, displaying skills that no recruit should possess. Williams was staring at her with a mixture of amazement and confusion, clearly recognizing that everything he thought he knew about her was wrong. "I used to," Rebecca started, then stopped. How could she explain without revealing everything? How could she maintain any semblance of her cover story when she'd just demonstrated capabilities that contradicted months of carefully maintained mediocrity? Before she could formulate an answer, Martinez's voice cut through the radio static. "Again, any station, this is Bravo 6. We have 3 casualties and are taking heavy fire. Request immediate medical evacuation and fire support." The desperation in his voice made Rebecca's decision for her. Cover story or no cover story, people were in danger, and she had the skills to help them. Everything else would have to wait. "Williams, I need you to listen very carefully," she said, her voice calm despite the chaos around them. "What I'm about to tell you can't leave this hillside. Not ever, do you understand?" Williams nodded, his eyes wide with growing realization. "My name isn't really Rebecca Thompson. 6 years ago, I was Captain Rebecca Hayes, 75th Ranger Regiment, attached to a classified unit conducting operations in Afghanistan." The words came out in a rush, years of careful deception evaporating in seconds. "I was declared killed in action during a helicopter crash that never happened. Rebecca Thompson is a cover identity, and I've been living under it ever since." Williams's mouth fell open. You're a ranger? A real one?" "Was a ranger. Now I'm supposed to be nobody. But those people down there are about to get seriously hurt, and I can't let that happen just to protect a cover story that doesn't matter anymore." Rebecca pulled out her map, spreading it on the ground between them. With swift, precise movements, she marked enemy positions, fields of fire, and approach routes with the kind of tactical knowledge that came from extensive combat experience. "The opposition force has Team Bravo pinned in a kill zone here," she explained, pointing to a depression in the terrain. "Classic L-shaped ambush, probably 3 or 4 instructors with automatic weapons positioned here, and here." Williams stared at the tactical analysis, understanding for the first time why Rebecca had seemed so different from the other struggling recruits. "This is why you've been failing at everything. You've been pretending to be incompetent. The physical training, the marksmanship, the tactical exercises, I had to perform below standard to maintain my cover. But I can't do that anymore, not when people are getting hurt." Another burst of gunfire echoed across the valley, punctuated by someone calling for a medic. Rebecca folded the map and checked her weapon with movements that spoke of countless hours of training and real-world experience. "Here's what we're going to do," she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd planned and executed dozens of similar operations. "I'm going to move to this position and engage the primary ambush site. When they shift their fire to deal with me, you're going to help Martinez extract his casualties to this covered position." Williams looked at the route she'd indicated, his academic mind struggling to process tactical concepts he'd only read about. "But what if they shoot you? What if this goes wrong?" Rebecca smiled grimly. "Williams, I've been shot at by professionals who were trying to kill me for real. These instructors are using paint rounds and following safety protocols. The worst thing that happens is I get killed in a training exercise." She paused, meeting his eyes with an intensity that made him understand she was about to ask something significant. "But I need your word that you won't tell anyone what I've told you. Not Martinez, not the instructors, not anyone. My life depends on staying dead to the rest of the world." Williams nodded slowly. "I don't understand why you're hiding. But I'll keep your secret. Just be careful down there." Rebecca began moving down the hillside, her entire demeanor transformed from struggling recruit to professional soldier. Williams watched in amazement as she flowed through the terrain like water, using every piece of cover to mask her approach. To the enemy positions for the first time in months, Rebecca Hayes was allowing herself to be who she really was, a warrior trained to save lives and complete impossible missions. The weight of pretense fell away, replaced by the familiar clarity that came with having a clear objective and the skills to achieve it. She reached her chosen firing position and began acquiring targets with the kind of precision that came from extensive combat experience. Through her rifle scope, she could see the instructor positions that had Team Bravo pinned down. Professional soldiers conducting a training exercise, but soldiers nonetheless who would react predictably to being engaged from an unexpected direction. Rebecca keyed her radio, using a tone of command that would have been instantly recognizable to anyone who'd served with special operations units. "Bravo 6, this is Guardian Angel. I'm in position to provide fire support. When I engage, extract your casualties to the northern tree line. Acknowledge." Martinez's voice came back immediately, carrying a note of surprise at the professional terminology and confident tone. "Guardian Angel, this is Bravo 6. Roger, understand the northern tree line on your signal." Rebecca took a deep breath, steadied her rifle, and prepared to blow her cover completely in order to save the lives of people who had no idea who she really was. "Bravo 6, Guardian Angel. Fire mission commencing in 3.2. The first round found its target with mechanical precision, striking the primary instructor position with enough accuracy to immediately shift their attention from Team Bravo to this new threat. Rebecca's subsequent shots were equally precise, demonstrating marksmanship skills that no failing recruit should possess. But for the first time in 6 years, she didn't care who was watching or what conclusions they might draw. She was a soldier again, doing what soldiers do, protecting her fellow warriors and completing the mission at any cost. The simulation rounds stopped flying as Rebecca's precision fire neutralized the instructor positions one by one. In the sudden silence that followed, the only sounds were Williams's labored breathing and the distant voice of Martinez coordinating the evacuation of his wounded teammates. Rebecca lowered her rifle, the familiar weight of successful mission completion settling over her like an old coat. "How did you do that?" Williams whispered, staring at her with something approaching awe. "That was like watching a completely different person." Rebecca saved her weapon and began scanning the area for additional threats, her training automatic, even in a controlled exercise environment. Because it was a different person. Captain Rebecca Hayes died 6 years ago in the mountains of Afghanistan. What you just saw was her ghost. As they waited for the all-clear signal from the exercise controllers, Williams pressed for answers that Rebecca had never given anyone. "Why did you fake your death? Why are you hiding as a failing recruit? None of this makes sense. Rebecca considered how much truth she could reveal without compromising operational security that might still matter. The story of how Captain Rebecca Hayes became Rebecca Thompson was classified at levels that most people never even knew existed. Afghanistan 2018, she began, her voice taking on the distant quality of someone reliving traumatic memories. I was leading a joint task force operation in the Kunar province, tracking a high-value target who'd been orchestrating attacks against forward operating bases throughout the region. She paused, watching Martinez's team emerge from cover in the valley below, carrying their wounded with the careful precision of soldiers who understood that even simulated injuries could become real ones if mishandled. The intelligence was solid. We knew where he was, when he'd be there, how many people would be with him. What we didn't know was that our operation had been compromised from the beginning. Someone on our side was feeding information to the enemy. Williams listened intently, his academic mind cataloging details while trying to process the reality that he'd been sharing barracks with someone who'd lived through experiences most people only saw in movies. The mission went bad from the first minute, Rebecca continued. We inserted via helicopter into what was supposed to be a secure landing zone. Instead, we flew into a prepared ambush with heavy machine guns, RPGs, and about 50 fighters who knew exactly when and where we were coming. She closed her eyes, and Williams could see her reliving the moment when everything had changed. My helicopter took an RPG hit during the approach. The pilot managed to auto-rotate us down, but we crash-landed in the middle of a kill zone with no cover and nowhere to run. The radio crackled with the exercise controller, announcing that the immediate threat had been neutralized and medical evacuation was en route for the casualties. But Rebecca seemed not to hear it, lost in memories from a different time and place. 8 soldiers in my unit, she said quietly. 3 died in the crash. 2 more were killed trying to establish a defensive perimeter. That left 3 of us, me, my radio man Sergeant Collins, and our medic, Doc Martinez. Williams's eyes widened. Martinez? Like our Martinez? Different Martinez. Common name in the Army. Rebecca's expression darkened. We held out for 14 hours, waiting for extraction that never came. The enemy had us surrounded, and our radio was damaged in the crash. We were on our own. She described the firefight that followed with clinical precision, the way someone might explain a tactical exercise rather than a life-or-death struggle. But Williams could hear the emotion beneath the professional terminology, the weight of command decisions made under impossible circumstances. By the time night fell, we were down to our last magazines, and Doc was working on casualties with medical supplies that were running out fast. Collins had taken shrapnel in the leg, and I had a bullet fragment in my shoulder that was making it hard to aim properly. The evacuation helicopter appeared over the ridgeline, its rotors beating the air with the distinctive sound that brought back memories Rebecca had spent years trying to suppress. She watched it land near Martinez's position, medical personnel rushing to load the wounded recruits who would be back to full health in a matter of days. That's when I made the decision that ended Captain Rebecca Hayes' life, she continued. I knew the enemy was planning a final assault at dawn. We couldn't fight them off with 3 people and no ammunition. But there was an option, a very bad option that might save my team. Williams waited, sensing that she was approaching the heart of the story that had transformed a decorated Army officer into a struggling recruit with a fake identity. Intelligence had provided us with coordinates for an emergency extraction point about 2 kilometers from our position. The problem was getting there through enemy territory while carrying wounded personnel and no ammunition for covering fire. Rebecca pulled out her map, the same one she'd used to plan the rescue of Martinez's team, and pointed to a section marked with elevation lines and terrain features. The route required crossing open ground under observation, moving through areas where the enemy had established checkpoints, and reaching the extraction point without being detected. She traced a path across the map with her finger, the movement. Automatic and precise. Standard tactical doctrine said it was impossible. 3 soldiers, 2 of them wounded, moving through hostile territory with no support and no ammunition. The survival probability was essentially 0. Williams studied the route she'd indicated, his academic mind trying to grasp the complexity of the tactical problem. But you did it somehow. You're here, so you must have succeeded. I succeeded, Rebecca confirmed. But Captain Rebecca Hayes didn't survive the mission. That was the price of success. She described the movement through enemy territory with the same clinical precision she'd used for the firefight, but Williams could hear the cost in her voice. 2 days of carrying wounded teammates through mountains where every shadow might hide an enemy fighter, every sound might bring death. We reached the extraction point after 48 hours of movement. Collins was unconscious from blood loss. Doc was barely able to walk, and I was running on adrenaline and determination. The helicopter was waiting, just like intelligence had promised. The extraction itself had been routine wounded soldiers loaded aboard, aircraft departing the area without incident. But during the flight, Rebecca had made a decision that would change everything. Halfway back to base, I received a message that changed everything. Intelligence had identified the source of the leak that had compromised our mission. Someone in our own chain of command had been providing operational details to the enemy in exchange for money and safe passage for his family. Williams's eyes widened. Someone was selling out American soldiers? A colonel in the intelligence division. Someone with access to mission planning, troop movements, everything needed to set up perfect ambushes. My unit wasn't the first to walk into a trap. There had been others, operations that failed for reasons that never made sense until we identified the leak. Rebecca folded the map, her movements precise despite the emotional weight of the memories. The problem was proving it. The colonel had covered his tracks well, and he had connections at the highest levels of command. A formal investigation would have taken months, during which more soldiers would die in compromised operations. She looked directly at Williams, her gray eyes carrying the weight of decisions that had shaped years of her life. So I volunteered for a different kind of mission. The kind that doesn't appear in official records, that never gets reported to Congress, that only exists in the darkest corners of military intelligence. Williams began to understand the magnitude of what she was describing. You became a covert operative. I became a ghost. Officially, Captain Rebecca Hayes died when her helicopter developed mechanical problems during the return flight and crashed in a remote mountain valley. The wreckage was never recovered due to hostile activity in the area. Memorial service, folded flag, widow's benefits for a spouse who didn't exist. The transformation had been total and irreversible. New identity, new background, new life constructed from classified budgets and carefully forged documents. Rebecca Thompson emerged from the ashes of Rebecca Hayes like a phoenix designed for espionage rather than glory. For 3 years, I worked undercover missions that officially never happened. Counterintelligence operations, deep penetration assignments, jobs that required someone who was already dead and couldn't be traced back to any official organization. She described operations in countries that weren't supposed to have American military presence, missions that prevented terrorist attacks without anyone knowing they'd been planned, intelligence gathering that saved lives by stopping problems before they became headlines. The colonel who'd been selling information? He had an accident during a climbing trip in Colorado. Terrible tragedy, equipment failure, body never recovered. The intelligence leak stopped immediately afterward. Williams was beginning to understand the scope of the secret world that Rebecca had inhabited. How many operations were there? 17 confirmed missions over 3 years. Some involved gathering intelligence, others required more direct action. All of them were successful, and none of them officially existed. Rebecca's voice carried no pride, only the matter-of-fact tone of someone reporting statistical data. The return to civilian life, or what passed? For civilian life, when your official identity was fabricated, had been the most difficult part. Years of living in the shadows, of being someone who couldn't form lasting relationships or maintain normal social connections. After the third year, my handlers decided I'd become too valuable to risk on additional missions. Too much institutional knowledge, too many secrets that would be compromised if I was captured or killed. So they retired Rebecca Hayes permanently and gave Rebecca Thompson a normal life. Williams struggled to process the implications. But why join the Army again? Why risk exposure by enlisting under your cover identity? Rebecca's answer revealed the core truth that had driven her decision to return to military service, despite the risks, because being a ghost is a lonely existence. Because I missed serving with people who understood what it meant to put the mission first. Because Rebecca Thompson was just a name on forged documents, until I found something worth protecting. Again. She gestured toward the valley where Martinez's team was being loaded into evacuation helicopters, where instructors were conducting after-action reviews with recruits who had no idea they'd just participated in an exercise, led by someone with extensive combat experience. These people, Davis, Chun, Williams, even Martinez with his suspicious questions, they're why I'm here. Because someone needs to watch over the next generation of soldiers, and ghosts can go places that official personnel can't. The radio crackled with instructions for all teams to return to base for debriefing and medical evaluation. The exercise was officially over, but Rebecca knew that questions would be asked about the precision fire that had ended the engagement, about tactical communications that sounded more professional than recruit-level training should allow. What happens now? Williams asked as they prepared to move back to the extraction point. Rebecca shouldered her pack, transforming back into the struggling recruit she'd been pretending to be for months. But Williams could see the difference now, the way she moved. The constant scanning for threats, the automatic weapon handling that spoke of extensive training. Now you forget everything I've told you, she said firmly. Rebecca Thompson continues to be a marginal recruit who got lucky during a training exercise. Captain Rebecca Hayes remains dead and buried. And you never mentioned this conversation to anyone, ever. Williams nodded understanding, but Rebecca could see the questions in his eyes, the academic curiosity that wanted to explore every aspect of the story she'd shared. I know it's hard to understand, she continued. But some secrets are bigger than the people who carry them. My life depends on staying dead to the rest of the world. And that means even the people who know the truth have to help maintain the lie. As they walked back toward the extraction point where the rest of their unit was gathering, Rebecca felt the familiar weight of deception settling over her again. Soon she would have to explain her exceptional performance during the firefight, deflect questions about tactical knowledge she wasn't supposed to possess, and convince everyone that what they'd witnessed was luck rather than skill. But for a few moments, she had been herself again, not a failing recruit or a manufactured identity, but the soldier she'd been trained to be. And despite the complications it would create, despite the questions that would be asked, she found herself grateful for the opportunity to remember who she really was beneath all the carefully constructed lies the debriefing room buzzed with nervous energy as the 4 training teams assembled for their after-action review. Rebecca sat in her usual back row position, but she could feel the weight of stares from instructors and fellow recruits alike. Word had spread quickly about the mysterious guardian angel, who had single-handedly neutralized the opposition force with precision fire that belonged in a sniper manual. Not a basic training exercise. Colonel Harrison stood at the front of the room, his weathered face betraying none of the curiosity that Rebecca knew must be burning behind his professional demeanor. Staff Sergeant Collins paced along the side wall, his eyes repeatedly finding Rebecca, as if he were trying to solve a puzzle that had suddenly become much more complex. Exercise Iron Gauntlet is officially concluded, Harrison announced. Medical personnel report that all injuries sustained during the exercise were minor and consistent with training protocols. Everyone who was evacuated will return to full duty within 48 hours. A collective sigh of relief filled the room. Despite the realistic nature of the exercise, everyone had made it through without serious harm. But Rebecca knew the real evaluation was just beginning. However, Harrison continued, several unusual incidents occurred during this exercise that require further investigation. Specifically, the tactical communications and fire support provided by an unknown element designated Guardian Angel, Rebecca, forced herself to maintain the expression of confused innocence she'd perfected over months of training. Around her, other recruits whispered speculation about who Guardian Angel might have been. Perhaps a hidden instructor providing emergency support, or maybe advanced equipment that hadn't been mentioned in the briefing. Martinez raised his hand. Sir, whoever Guardian Angel was, they saved my team. Professional-level tactical communication, precision fire that neutralized multiple targets, coordination that kept my wounded alive until evacuation arrived. Describe the communication style, Harrison requested, and Rebecca's pulse quickened. Slightly. Military terminology I'd expect from special operations personnel, sir. Calm under pressure, precise tactical language, confident command presence. Definitely not the basic training level. Collins stepped forward, his eyes scanning the assembled recruits. The question is, which one of you has been hiding advanced military training? Because someone in this room demonstrated capabilities that don't match their official records. The room fell silent as every recruit began looking at their neighbors, searching for signs of deception. Rebecca felt Williams's eyes on her briefly, but he maintained the poker face she'd requested. Davis looked genuinely confused, still nursing bruises from his early elimination. Shun appeared focused on not aggravating his shoulder injury. Thompson, Collins called suddenly, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade. Rebecca's heart rate remained steady through years of training. In maintaining cover under pressure. Yes, Staff Sergeant. You were with Williams when the Guardian Angel fire support began. Did you observe the source of the shooting? The question was a trap, Rebecca realized. Collins suspected her involvement, but lacked proof. Her answer would either deflect suspicion or confirm his growing doubts about her true capabilities. We heard the gunfire, Staff Sergeant, but we were focused on moving to our objective. I assumed it was another training team providing support. Yet, Collins continued, radio logs show that Guardian Angel used your team's frequency to coordinate with Team Bravo. Care to explain how an unknown shooter gained access to your communication channel? Williams shifted uncomfortably beside her, clearly understanding the implications of the question. Rebecca's mind raced through possible explanations that wouldn't completely destroy her cover story. Could have been monitoring multiple frequencies. Staff Sergeant. Or maybe they were assigned to our channel as backup support that wasn't mentioned in the briefing. It was weak, and everyone in the room knew it. But it was also plausible enough that it couldn't be dismissed without additional evidence. Harrison consulted a tablet displaying what appeared to be detailed exercise logs. Instructor Johnson, you were operating the primary ambush position. Describe the fire you received from Guardian Angel. The instructor, a grizzled veteran with 20 years of experience, stood up slowly. Precision fire, sir. First shot disabled. My position. Subsequent shots were placed exactly where they needed to be to suppress our defensive fire without causing injury. Marksmanship level I'd expect from advanced designated marksman training. And the tactical movement? Harrison pressed. Textbook. Special operations approach. Used terrain to mask movement. Chose firing positions that maximized effectiveness while minimizing exposure. Extracted without leaving any tactical signature. Whoever Guardian Angel is, they've had extensive professional training. Rebecca felt the neck tightening around her as more details emerged. Every aspect of her performance had been observed and analyzed by professionals who understood exactly what they'd witnessed. "The interesting thing," Collins added, his voice carrying a note of suspicion, "is that Guardian Angel seemed to know exactly where our opposition forces were positioned, despite having no prior reconnaissance of the area. Almost like they had intelligence that wasn't available to the regular training teams." Williams cleared his throat nervously. "Staff Sergeant, maybe Guardian Angel was watching the exercise develop and figured out the positions from observing the engagement." Collins's eyes shifted to Williams, studying him with the same intensity he'd been applying to Rebecca. Possible, Private Williams. But that would require tactical knowledge and situational awareness beyond basic training level. The questioning continued for another 30 minutes, with instructors dissecting every aspect of the Guardian Angel intervention. Rebecca answered when directly questioned, maintaining her cover of confused incompetence while deflecting suspicion wherever possible. But she could see Collins building the case, connecting dots that would eventually lead back to her. The staff sergeant's military experience included tours with special operations units. He understood what he'd witnessed and wasn't buying the suggestion that it had been coincidence or luck. Finally, Harrison brought the formal debriefing to a close. All personnel returned to barracks for equipment turn-in and personal cleanup. Team leaders report to my office in 1 hour for individual assessment interviews. As the room began to empty, Collins approached Rebecca directly. "Thompson, I'd like you to remain behind for a few additional questions." Williams hesitated, clearly wanting to support her but lacking any legitimate reason to stay. Rebecca gave him a slight nod, indicating he should leave with the others. She would handle Collins. "Alone, Staff Sergeant?" she prompted once they were alone. Collins studied her for a long moment, his experienced eyes searching for cracks in her carefully maintained facade. "Thompson, I've been training recruits for 15 years. I've seen every type of person who walks through those doors: athletes, academics, troublemakers, natural soldiers, and people who probably shouldn't be here." Rebecca waited, knowing that Collins was building towards something significant. "You've been the most consistently inconsistent recruit I've ever encountered," he continued. "Physical training scores that suggest you're barely functional, but tactical awareness that emerges at exactly the right moments. Marksmanship that's mediocre on the range, but apparently exceptional under pressure. Communication skills that range from stumbling recruit to professional military terminology." He moved closer, his voice dropping to a more personal tone. "Who are you really, Thompson? Because whoever you are, you're not the struggling recruit from Ohio that your paperwork claims." Rebecca met his gaze steadily, drawing on years of experience in maintaining cover identities under intense scrutiny. "I'm exactly who my records say I am, Staff Sergeant. Sometimes people surprise themselves under pressure." "Surprise themselves?" Collins's voice carried disbelief. "Thompson, Guardian Angel demonstrated capabilities that take years of advanced training to develop. Either you're the most naturally gifted soldier I've ever encountered, or you've been lying about your background since the day you arrived." The moment of truth had arrived, Rebecca realized. Collins wasn't going to accept deflection or weak explanations. She could continue maintaining her cover and hope he lacked evidence to prove his suspicions, or she could find a middle ground that satisfied his curiosity without completely exposing her true identity. "Staff Sergeant," she said carefully, "what if I told you that some people have reasons for not wanting their full background to be known? What if maintaining a low profile is more important than getting credit for things they've done?" Collins's expression shifted, recognizing that Rebecca was offering a limited disclosure rather than continued denial. "I'd say that depends on what kind of background we're talking about." Rebecca considered her options. Collins was intelligent, experienced, and persistent. He would continue investigating until he found answers. Better to give him a version of the truth that satisfied his curiosity while protecting her deepest Secrets, prior military service, she said finally. Not as extensive as Guardian Angel's performance might suggest, but enough to explain some tactical knowledge that basic training recruits aren't supposed to have. What kind of prior service? The kind that doesn't appear in normal military records, Staff Sergeant. The kind where people sometimes need to start over with clean backgrounds for reasons that are classified above both our pay grades. Collins absorbed this information, his expression showing that he understood the implications. Military intelligence, operations, witness protection programs, classified assignments, all could result in personnel with hidden backgrounds and carefully constructed cover identities. Why enlist again under a different identity? He asked. Rebecca's answer came from genuine emotion rather than calculated deception. Because being a soldier is the only thing I've ever been good at, Staff Sergeant. Because some people need the structure and purpose that military service provides. Because serving with people who understand what it means to put a mission first is better than trying to pretend to be a civilian. Collins studied her for another long moment, then came to a decision that would change everything. Thompson, I'm going to make you an offer. I don't know who you really are, and maybe I don't need to know. But I recognize professional capability when I see it, and I recognize someone who's committed to serving their country, regardless of the personal cost. Rebecca waited, understanding that her future in the Army hung on Collins's next words. Complete your basic training as Rebecca Thompson. Keep your head down, maintain your cover, don't demonstrate any more miracle marksmanship unless lives are actually in danger. After graduation, I'll arrange for you to be assigned to advanced training that matches your real capabilities. What kind of advanced training? Collins smiled for the first time since she'd known him. The kind where people with unusual backgrounds and exceptional skills can serve their country without having to pretend to be incompetent. The kind where guardian angels are appreciated rather than investigated. Rebecca felt a weight lifting from her shoulders that she hadn't realized she'd been carrying. For the first time since creating the Rebecca Thompson identity, she saw a path forward that didn't require constant deception and artificial failure. What about the other recruits? Williams knows more than he should. Williams will be fine. Academic types are good at keeping secrets when they understand the stakes. Davis and Chun will remember Guardian Angel as a mysterious training event that saved their friend's life. Martinez. Collins paused. Martinez will probably spend years trying to figure out what really happened, but he's also the kind of soldier who understands that some questions don't need answers. Over the following weeks, Rebecca completed her basic training with carefully modulated performance competent enough to graduate, not so exceptional as to draw additional attention. Williams never mentioned their conversation on the hillside, though his respect for her was evident in small gestures of support and protection. Martinez continued to watch her with curious eyes, but his questions became less probing as he focused on his own military development. Davis recovered fully from his exercise injuries and developed into a competent leader who no longer underestimated the capabilities of his teammates. Chun proved to be steady and reliable, the kind of soldier who formed the backbone of effective military units. At graduation, Rebecca stood in formation with her fellow recruits, listening to speeches about service and sacrifice while contemplating the strange journey that had brought her to this moment. She'd enlisted as a way to hide from her past, but instead had found a path back to her true calling. Collins found her after the ceremony, carrying orders that would send her to advanced training at Fort Campbell assignment to a unit that specialized in unconventional operations and didn't ask too many questions about personnel backgrounds. One last thing, Thompson, he said, handing her the orders. Guardian Angel was never officially identified in the exercise records. As far as the Army is concerned, it was equipment malfunction that resolved the training scenario. Sometimes the best operations are the ones that never officially happened. Rebecca understood the gift he was giving her, the opportunity to continue, serving while maintaining the anonymity that kept her safe. Captain Rebecca Hayes would remain dead and buried, but Rebecca Thompson could serve with honor in missions that mattered. As she prepared to leave Fort Braxton for her new assignment, Rebecca reflected on the irony of her situation. She'd tried to hide by pretending to fail, but failure had led to a different kind of success. She'd revealed her true capabilities to save her fellow soldiers, and that revelation had opened doors rather than destroying her cover. The ghost would continue to serve, but now she could do so without the constant weight of deception. In a world that needed guardians who could operate in the shadows, Rebecca Thompson had found her place protecting those who would never know her real name, serving a country that believed she was already dead, and finding purpose in missions that would never make the headlines. Some soldiers served for glory and recognition. Others served because service itself was its own reward. Rebecca Thompson understood the difference, and she was finally at peace with the choice she'd made years ago on a mountainside in Afghanistan. The mission would continue, as it always had, in the shadows where heroes weren't celebrated, but where their work made celebration possible for everyone else. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.